The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-host and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on our live shows.
Broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this episode of This Week in Guns is sponsored by Patriot Patch Company. PatriotPatch.co.
Welcome to This Week in Guns. This show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network and Patriot Patch Company.
And this show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and buzz. I'm your host, Sean Heron. As always, I am lucky enough to introduce our panelists tonight. First up, we have a returning panelist. He's an NRA instructor, California CCW advocate, and host of Shooter, the series on YouTube. Ed Thorell, welcome back.
Hey, it's great to be back. Thanks.
Glad to have you. Next up, we've got a newbie. She's an NRA instructor, firearms enthusiast, BeyondTheUnknown on Instagram, and contributor to the Gun Collective. Genevieve Jones, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
All right. Well, you won't be as soon as we get into it because we have a lot of stories to talk about tonight. I'm going to kick us right off. First up, several New Mexico counties declared themselves 2A sanctuary cities. And what they mean by that is basically that if the state enacts sweeping gun control, they say that those things don't count in their counties. And this is San Juan, Lincoln, and Eddy counties. They've all adopted these resolutions. And it's kind of interesting. I'm going to start off just getting you guys' thoughts on this. Genevieve, since you're new, I'm going to start with you.
Great. So I think it's really awesome. It's really nice to have more people on our side and hear about that stuff, because a lot of times we only hear about the negative laws that are being enacted towards us. So it's great to see people supporting the Second Amendment.
Ed?
Well, I think it's a great counterpoint to cities and states that are declaring sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
We're either national laws or we're not. We can't pick and choose.
I do agree. Now, in Illinois, there's other counties and places that have said, hey, they've passed resolutions, whatever, locally that say, hey, we're sanctuary cities as well, or counties. Illinois is seeking to block that. Apparently, they don't care about the rule of law, but an Illinois lawmaker wants to make sure that local governments don't try to flout state gun laws symbolically or otherwise. The measure comes after dozens of Illinois counties last year passed largely symbolic gun sanctuary ordinances that promise not to enforce unconstitutional gun bans. This is a freshman state representative in Illinois, and he's kind of running this. But at the very end, it says that Pearson says Costa Howard's bill is a home rule issue and that there's real opposition to her measure and other gun control bills. So the whole thing is very interesting to me. Of course, Illinois is trying to crack down on them because they want to run things. But even in Illinois, there's counties and cities that want to take control of their own future. Genevieve, what do you think of that?
Well, I think it's great. I know PA is pretty good on gun laws right now. It's probably a lot harder, Ed, where you are over in California, but it's nice to know that we've got places to go just in case, these sanctuaries for the 2A community. I think that's cool.
I do too. Ed?
Yeah.
Illinois?
Well, I'd love it if California had some of those.
Well, they have plenty of them, just not for guns.
We got the beach. We got the weather. That's about it.
Yep. Now, opponents in New Mexico are saying that Second Amendment sanctuaries are not enforceable. And I think this is pretty interesting. So in Santa Fe, sheriffs in Second Amendment sanctuary counties said that they won't enforce certain gun control bills being proposed by lawmakers in Santa Fe if those bills become law. I think that's pretty reasonable. But I don't know. This is going to turn into something, I think. The counties and cities are saying, nope, we're not going to have it. And especially places like Colorado, where Fort Collins and Boulder and Denver are three blue areas on the map surrounded by seas of red, but they are the ones that kind of direct our political stuff just because of gerrymandering and the way that the voting districts are locked up. But clearly this is cities, counties, whatever, that are taking a stand. I think that this is going to be a thing that we see a lot more of, and we're going to see a lot of pretty big fights, whether it's in the courtrooms or on the streets, from this stuff. Would you agree, Ed?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that most of this would be delegated to the county sheriff to enforce. And there's a lot of county sheriffs out there that are pro 2A that say, I'm not going to endanger my people to enforce a law that's not right.
Yeah. The next story that we're going to talk about is 8 attorney generals tell the Supreme Court of the United States that the Second Amendment covers suppressors too. I think this is interesting. This comes to us after that case in Kansas. Kansas has laws that kind of protect people from federal laws as relates to certain areas of that. And this is a guy who went into a Navy or an Army surplus store and bought a suppressor off the shelf with no tax stamp, background check, anything like that, because Kansas law defended that. Now, Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt and 7 other AGs representing Arkansas, Idaho, Louisiana, Montana, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah, they've actually asked the Supreme Court to review a Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit decision that held that firearms accessories fall outside the scope of the Second Amendment protections. Genevieve, wouldn't that be awesome?
Oh, yeah. I think anything that would make a suppressor easier to obtain would be really, really cool. I mean, it is kind of amazing the amount of background checks and wait time that is involved in getting a suppressor currently, as opposed to just purchasing a firearm. I mean, I think it's a little bit absurd.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Now, Ed, the 10th Circuit explained that in their decision that a silencer is a firearm accessory. It's not a weapon in itself, nor is it armor of defense, in quotes. Accordingly, it can't be a bearable arm protected by the Second Amendment. And the AG say, in holding that firearms accessories are categorically excluded from the Second Amendment's protections, the 10th Circuit improperly narrowed the scope of that important amendment in conflict with the decisions of this court and other circuits. This court's review is needed to affirm that the arms protected by the Second Amendment include such items as silencers and other firearms accessories. I mean, that would be a utopia, in my opinion. Ed, what do you think?
Well, I mean, they pretty much set a precedent with the bump stock. If they can single out an accessory, then why can't the same application be applied to a suppressor?
Yeah, I agree. And here's the thing. If this goes through, if the Supreme Court does take this and does rule that suppressors are basically protected under the Second Amendment, that would be a huge rippling effect. And the bump stock ban would basically be invalidated because it is a firearms accessory, at least the way that I'm reading this. So here's hoping. And again, Trump has 2 appointees, possibly even 3 if RBG ends up leaving the bench for some reason. So that might be the biggest legacy, in my opinion, that a president has had in my lifetime.
I agree.
Next,
I want one.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got 5. I want one for every gun.
Why not?
Did you guys hear the story? A Coast Guard lieutenant arrested on gun and drug charges, labeled a domestic terrorist. At first, I was like, oh, whatever. I'm not buying it. But then I kind of read through it a little bit. He wasn't found with what I would consider a lot of stuff. When they raided him, they recovered 15 firearms and more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition from his cramped basement apartment. What they also found was a spreadsheet of so-called traitors subdivided into 3 categories, A, B, and C. Category A traitors included a bunch of Democrats and senators and, just politicians, things like that. And B and C continued on and on and on. This guy apparently pretty extremist, and it seems like they stopped something that was going to be pretty bad. I wasn't able to find in the article where specifically they had the reason to go serve their warrants or whatever, but it does seem like they stopped something bad. Genevieve, what do you think?
I do agree with you that owning 15 guns and over 1,000 rounds of ammunition isn't really that absurd. I mean, I have way more than that, but threatening or even wanting to harm a bunch of people on the left, where I can agree with being upset with them, but we shouldn't stoop to that level that other people have stooped to, and I think it's a good thing that he got arrested, honestly, because from reading that article, it seemed like he had malicious intent. So
yeah, I totally agree. And here's the thing. I despise a lot of Democratic politicians. You know what? I despise people that are anti-gun. In general, I'm friends with a ton of people that are anti-gun. I don't wish them harm. I don't wish people that I disagree with on political issues harm. That's just my thoughts on the matter. Ed, what are your thoughts?
Well, I saw the picture of what was seized, and in some places, and especially with my friends, that's considered a starter pack.
Yes, those are rookie numbers.
But I completely agree with you. I don't wish harm against anybody, and I think they stopped a tragedy that basically would have colored everybody with, those types of guns as being, nuts like the guy was. So it saved everybody. It was a win-win.
I agree. He had drafted 3 months prior to his arrest an email to friends, in quotes, in which he said he's dreaming of a way to kill almost every last person on the earth. I think a plague would be most successful, but how do I acquire the needed Spanish flu, botulism, and anthrax? Not sure yet, but we'll find something. So he was clearly an idiot, and I'm glad he's off the streets personally.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah.
Pretty nuts. All right, so California, they hate the guns as a state, but there's a lot of gun owners in California. Well, now California, they're taking gun rights away left and right, but now they want more hunters. The California Department of Wildlife has put forth I don't know, what do you call it? A program where they're trying to get more people to hunt, which seems so weird coming from California. Hunting actually has dropped quite a bit in the United States through the 70s and 80s. And 2016 survey by U.S. Fish and Wildlife showed only about 5% of Americans over the age of 16 hunt, which was a 50% decline in 5 decades. So California is really working, the Department of Wildlife in California is really working hard to bring more hunters to California, which, I don't know, it just seems so weird to me. Ed, being in California, what do you think about this?
Well, California is very much split by region. Southern California is very urban, so we don't have the same hunting or firearm culture here that exists in Northern California. So in Southern California, I know some people that hunt, but not like Northern California. But I got to admit, California is taking kind of a bipolar approach to this because on one hand, they're doing everything they can to create more levels of control. And then on the other hand, they're trying to make more money by selling more hunting licenses. So it's really hard to kind of rationalize their approach. And I read the article and I just scratched my head.
I know. It was just, I was like, I had to go to the top and be like, wait, where is this coming from? California. No, I read it right. Genevieve, what do you make of all this?
I mean, they want more hunters. Great. I'm super for that. It is a little bit weird coming from them. I do think that they are way less afraid of shotguns and bolt action rifles than they are with AR-15s or anything like that. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that they would advocate towards that before they did anything else in the industry. But Ed's point about the hunting licenses and them making money off of that, that's a very interesting thing that I didn't think about.
Yeah, so much. Money generated from license fees and taxes on guns and ammunition provide approximately 60% of the funding to state wildlife agencies. That's huge. And hunting since 1937, hunters have contributed more than $14 billion to the conservation, management, and restoration of wildlife in the United States. So, I mean, hunting isn't just about, food and things like that. It's about conservation. And for people out there, if you're a gun person and you haven't gone on a hunt, maybe try it. Like, figure out a place where you can do something that is palatable to you, and go out and get out in nature and actually try it. I encourage people to hunt. I've hunted small things. I went on an antelope hunt this year. I didn't get anything, but it was really nice just to get my gun ready and to get out there and to make sure I had my gear, and then get out there and just spend time in America. I thought it was pretty great. So if you're a gun person and you haven't hunted, I highly suggest, get with somebody who has. Get out there and do it. Next story. North Dakota lawmakers kill red flag bill and block gun buybacks with public funds. Pretty good news out of North Dakota, but lawmakers in the Republican-controlled body sent a strong pro-gun message on Tuesday by making it illegal to use public dollars to buy private guns while turning away a so-called red flag bill. This is pretty great news. It means they can't do gun buybacks and things like that, which also a pretty good thing, especially in today's climate. And getting rid of that red flag bill was pretty great. Genevieve, what do you think about both of those things in North Dakota?
I read that article earlier today and I got so excited. I can't even tell you. I hate red flag laws so much. And I post a lot on my Instagram page about mental health, and I'm a huge advocate for that. And in the same vein, an advocate for not having your guns taken away from you because you have some issues. So I think that red flag laws are very stupid, and I'm very proud of them for denying that from passing.
Totally agree. Why do you think that red flag laws are stupid?
Just because going around the whole due process thing, like the whole idea of having somebody else call you unsafe without you even being able to defend yourself, it just doesn't really sound like freedom to me.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I don't really think that it's fair. There's a lot of times when someone can have a stupid feud with someone and they can go after their firearms without them even being able to defend themselves, and I don't think that that's right just because somebody goes to get help for an anxiety issue that everybody in the U.S. has.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that generally a stigma is almost placed on things like that. And
yes.
I think red flag laws make that even worse and perpetuate the inability of people to get the help that they need without fear of, becoming a target of one of these extreme risk protection orders or something like that. Would you agree?
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that.
And I think that that's going to be the opposite of what's good and the good that they hope to do with these ERPOs and red flag laws. By stigmatizing this even worse, I think that's one of the worst things they could possibly do.
Yeah, it just perpetuates a problem that can be fixed really easily, but people are too afraid to go and fix it because of things like this. So.
Yeah, I agree. Ed, what do you think?
Well, when I read it, I thought, it's about time to trade in my flip-flops for some snowshoes and head off to the great tundra. I've got a real problem with, skirting the 15th Amendment and not having due process where you're considered guilty and have to prove your own innocence. I think that also this is something that you can give California credit for. I want to say it started here and like a cancer is spreading, and it's pretty disturbing on a constitutional level. Yeah,
I 100% agree. It's a disaster. But we'll see. They're passing more and more all the time. I think, let's see, I just read over in the chat, New York just passed a ridiculous red flag bill. That was our producer, Kenny Ortega, said that. And they're going in all over the place. I think we're going to see one very soon here in Colorado, which is ridiculous. We've got Leslie Hollywood, who is a gun rights advocate, and she's on the We Like Shooting show on the Firearms Radio Network next week to talk about her work against red flag laws in Colorado. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, listen to We Like Shooting next week and hear a lot more about red flag laws and all that good stuff.
Will do.
Awesome. Yes, definitely.
Washington man arrested for threatening pro-gun sheriff. So 1639 passed in Washington. A bunch of sheriffs came out and said, you know what? These laws are almost impossible to enforce. What do you expect us to do? We are not going to enforce these. And a little snowflake basically said, sheriffs that are non-compliant will be shot by me. Another post on Facebook said, I really want to kill a police officer. Another post on Facebook said, I love how all my nightmares come true. This guy just kind of ridiculous. And it just goes back to it. Like, generally, Second Amendment advocates, gun people, you don't hear them saying things like this. And the people who I think are very anti-gun, sometimes I think they fear themselves and what they might do if they had an item that could kill people. And this guy is just clearly exactly that. Now, he's in custody. He's going to be charged with threats, and I don't see exactly what he's going to be charged with, but he is definitely in custody and booked into Spokane County Jail. Ed, what are your thoughts on that kind of violence when it comes to laws?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but I mean, I see this guy as basically, cleaning up the gene pool. If you're going to be that stupid, then, well, play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
I couldn't agree more.
That's all I got.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Genevieve, what do you think?
I read in that article that he also claims to speak for the trees. So, I mean, that's really all that I needed to know about that guy. But honestly, I think that it gives everybody kind of a bad name, which is really unfortunate. I knew a guy once who said, I don't care about your political beliefs. Just let me know when I can go in the street and start shooting people. And it's like, this is why we're not liked, because you people speak the loudest and it sucks.
Yep. And honestly, even on this show, we've had people talk about things like that. And, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Whether I agree with it or not is a completely different thing. But I don't think that does us any good when we talk about it's time to start, stacking bodies and things like that. I don't think that does us a lot of good. And I don't know. It is definitely a tough time.
Yeah.
New York pistol permit laws headed to the appeals court. This is a pretty interesting one. U.S. Court of Appeals case could overturn state pistol permit laws. This comes to us again from New York City, and the U.S. Court of Appeals is hearing oral arguments from attorney James Ostrowski challenging the state's pistol permit requirements. The reason this is interesting is if it did pass, it would kind of ripple throughout the entire United States and change places that are may issue to pretty much everywhere being shall issue, and probably challenged in the Supreme Court at some point. I think that may issue it's absolutely a gun ban because they may issue based on whatever crazy arbitrary regime they put into place. Genevieve, how do you feel about kind of just that thing, that case, and pistol permit laws across the United States as a whole?
I was skimming through that article, and I don't think I got to read the whole thing. So is New York going towards more of a relaxed state as far as pistol permit laws, or are they doing the opposite?
They're doing the opposite right now.
Oh, okay.
I believe New York is a may issue, but I do know that it's pretty difficult, if not damn near impossible,
right,
to get a concealed carry permit in New York.
Okay. Yeah, I've never actually been there personally, but I have heard stories from people who are up there, and it's really hard for them to be able to do what they want. And I think it's a little bit ridiculous, but there's always going to be some states that are on a totally different wavelength than everybody else, I guess. I would really hope that in the future they relax on that a little bit.
Yeah. And as I understand it, in New York, it's so difficult to get a permit that you basically have to know the right people. And if you don't, it doesn't get approved unless you can actually prove, whatever requirements they have. Ed, right, living in California, where it's also a may issue place, you know a little bit how difficult that is based on where you live. But what do you think about New York, California, and just pistol permits across the U.S.?
I think there's some strong crossovers. In Riverside County, where I'm at, we've got a pro-gun sheriff, and we've got about 99% of the people that apply get it. But then you look at L.A., and it's almost exactly the opposite, where you only get about 2%. So L.A. is pretty much in lockstep with, New York City. A lot of it's also based on the fact that they're both, ruled by liberal politicians. So it goes right along with, the entire belief system. And I think it's going to get to the Supreme Court. I wouldn't be surprised.
I think it would be a good thing, especially with the Supreme Court we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This one's not necessarily here at home, but there was a hijacking foiled on a Bangladesh Dubai flight. Suspect was killed. Passenger flight made an emergency landing because they had someone who was acting kind of crazy. Had a weapon on the plane and ended up dying in a shootout. But we don't really hear about this much in the United States, and I just kind of wanted to talk about that. We've put things in place, and though we know that TSA, through news reports and other, government reports and things like that, TSA is reasonably ineffective at preventing things from going on. But we haven't heard about anything necessarily bad like this in the United States in quite a while. The worst thing we had was the doctor that United, beat down in the aisle and dragged off the plane. Do you think that that's because of TSA or other requirements, or are we just lucky, Genevieve?
I think it might be a little bit of a combination of both. I personally am terrified of flying, so I don't ever want to admit that TSA doesn't actually do anything.
Well, they do something. They took my $400 pocket knife once.
Oh, hey, well, there you go. Look, they work 1/10 of the time.
It's fine.
Hearing about this kind of stuff and reading that article, it's a really scary read. I believe that the plane was headed towards Dubai, and it sort of just reinforced my desire to never go over to that area.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that.
Yeah.
Ed, what do you think?
Well, even though TSA probably has a lot to be desired, especially when you consider the security that countries like Israel puts up. And like Genevieve, I'm scared to death of flying commercial. I do it because I have to, not because I look forward to it. Mm-hmm. But you just got to ask yourself, what kind of security did they have in place that allowed, guns to get on board? Otherwise, this guy made a huge error thinking that he was going to get away with it, and didn't work out so well for him.
Yeah. And I think, stuff like that, I think, the fact that we don't hear about stuff like this in the U.S. At all anymore, I think does speak to how effective, our policies and procedures have been. Definitely there's a lot that are overreaching, and a lot of airlines do ridiculous things like Delta, I believe, zip tying your bags, which you can just easily twist off with a pen. they're not doing anything. But there are some procedures that they're doing that seem to be working. I'm just worried that it's not. I don't know. Is it working, or have we just been lucky, I guess, is my final thought on that.
Well, I think that being observant is probably the most effective tool against this stuff. Like what happened in the article, everyone noticed it going on. So as long as we can just be aware of our surroundings when we're flying or doing anything else that makes us a little bit nervous, I think that's the best tool that we could possibly have.
Yeah.
I agree.
Tony Simon said that since 9/11, we are known to beat down crazy people on planes. And that might be... I mean, we talk about an armed society being a polite society. We also talk about a society where if someone starts acting crazy on the plane, they're going to take a hit. So that might also dissuade people from doing nonsense. Anyway, enough about that. I want to talk about a sovereign citizen. He was arrested in Minnesota with a possible explosive device. He got pulled over by police for a revoked license. He told officers he didn't need a license. He tried the Obi-Wan Kenobi on him, but because he's a free citizen. A tense standoff ensued and lasted about 4 hours and 20 minutes. And eventually they got him out. They put chemicals into the car. He came out. They found a pig-shaped device with written on it, expletive, the police, and they're looking that it's a possible explosive. So just kind of interesting, and that whole sovereign citizen ideology is one that I am fascinated by. Genevieve, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a little bit ridiculous of this guy to claim that he doesn't need a driver's license because he's a sovereign citizen. I mean, come on. And two, I think it's really incredible how the police officers handled this entire situation. I have the utmost respect for them, because being in a situation like that for 4 hours or more, I mean, I can't even imagine doing that. And I think it's good that they caught this guy, because he's got some screws loose, I think.
I can just picture this dude in the car with the window cracked, screaming, "Am I being detained?"
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't mean to make fun. Like I like to try to accept people for whatever beliefs they have, but this is one that is difficult for me to get behind. I understand the concept behind it, but Ed, what are your thoughts here?
Well, my first thought was, the guy probably had more to worry about from the hundreds of people backed up in traffic behind him than he did from the cop. And I'm sure that all the cop had to say is, "I'm going to walk away, but I'm going to let the 100 people behind you deal with you." Good luck with that.
I do agree with that. A lot of road rage there is my guess. And I'm sure that he interrupted a lot of commutes. Speaking about the guy in Washington that threatened to shoot the sheriffs that didn't go through with I-1639, we have conservative activists assaulted at the Berkeley campus. He's now spoken out a bit. And Hayden Williams, 26, was assaulted while helping recruit conservatives at a UC Berkeley event, and was just kind of there. People started yelling at him and then started throwing punches. The pictures are, he definitely took a beating. And it just comes back to, I think it was Alex over in the YouTube chat said that violence is being normalized on the left. And I thought that was very interesting. Genevieve, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that violence is being normalized on the left side of the aisle politically? Or are we just kind of seeing some of the most unreasonable stuff?
To be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure either way. I do believe a little bit that violence is being normalized, but at the same time, I don't know exactly if what we're seeing is all the way truthful. You know how news stations are with that kind of stuff. But just from hearing friends of mine who have Instagram accounts, and actually my own Instagram account, I posted a picture of a gun, just a gun. And I was like, "Oh, this is my EDC. What's yours?" Someone commented on it and said, "So you admit to killing children?" And I was like, "What?" Like, that's a leap, buddy. That's a big leap.
I'm like, EDC, what does ED stands for? Maybe it doesn't mean what I think it means.
Right, exactly. So I do think that a lot of times being pro 2A to some of the extreme leftists is like a personal insult to them. So it kind of sucks that we're not able to have our own opinion without them reacting in very extreme ways. And I do see that happening more often than I did in the past. So I suppose, yes, I do actually think that violence is being normalized a little bit.
Ed, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I see it too. I was a former history professor at a community college, and I haven't done that since 2002. But you could see you could see the intolerance creeping up even 20 years ago. And frankly, I'm glad I'm not in that industry anymore. I have read a little bit. There was some more stuff that came out about the Berkeley assault today, and apparently they've been able to put a name to the guy. I'm not going to mention it just because, you know, if it's out there, I'm not going to increase this guy's notoriety and bring any harm to him if it's wrong. But despite the name, supposedly this guy is from Riverside, California, and is also a known Antifa member. They were able to compare photographs from a previous arrest. So the guy wasn't even a Berkeley student. So word on the street is he was flown in for this.
Wow.
But, you know, if it's on the internet, it must be true, right?
Of all the things to do, being a conservative activist at Berkeley must be one of the hardest.
Oh, absolutely.
And to be clear, this guy is not a student at Berkeley. He was just there doing some recruiting for conservative causes and things like that. Look, I don't know if you guys watch Steven Crowder. I really enjoy the guy, and I think his videos are reasonably interesting. But his Change My Mind series, where he goes on college campuses and things like that, to see the vile and vitriol that is hurled at him, it's pretty interesting. And I mean, at least in the edited videos that he shows, he's reasonable and backs things up with facts. And I realize that it is definitely confirmation bias on my part that I agree with him. But just seeing the way some people act is really an interesting study in just the sociological pathologies of politics and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to mention that since all of us are involved in EDC, we also know better that we're not supposed to go into situations to provoke. So for us, it's more important to be invisible than to try to go out and try to gain attention and either try to provoke or inadvertently provoke. Just avoid dangerous situations and not go looking for them.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because on the one hand, I do carry daily because I've decided that my life is more important than someone who would choose to steal mine. But I think being an activist is very important for us as Second Amendment advocates and just people that enjoy guns and the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans. And I feel like I almost feel like if I try to be political that I can't carry my firearm, but being political these days, based on what we see and read and hear, it seems like it might be a little bit dangerous, especially if violence is being normalized on the left side of that political aisle. So it's like, do I have to choose to be unarmed and possibly lose my life in order to act politically? It's kind of it is a catch-22, and it's something that I think about quite often.
Well, you know, our forefathers, you know, there's a whole reason behind having a Second Amendment, so that you could go where you wanted and say what you wanted without fear of you know, being accosted or assaulted. But people treat the Constitution as a flexible document, and because of that, they don't see the context of the original writing.
Yeah. And I agree with everything that you guys are saying. It is dangerous to have an opinion without a way to protect yourself anymore. When Trump got elected, I was 21, so I had just gotten my carry permit, and I was living in downtown Philadelphia at the time, and I saw a couple of people surrounding this ancient-looking veteran who was obviously pro-gun, had the hats on and everything, and they were just harassing him, and I made the decision that day to never leave my house without my gun.
I totally 100% agree.
Yeah.
Interesting times. All right. Well, here we go. Federal judge upholds bump stock ban. I'm going to go away from the story that's in the news and go to Firearms Policy Coalition. Now, Firearms Policy Coalition, through their legislative action branch or whatever it happens to be, I don't remember. It's Firearms Policy Foundation, actually. They hired Prince Law to file an injunction against the bump stock ban, just until they could get a final ruling on whether A, the Attorney General actually had the authority to sign that, B, whether it was constitutional. There's going to be a big long drawn out fight. Well, that injunction on Monday, February 25th, was actually rejected by the judge in a 64-page ruling, meaning that it's going to have to go forward in the court system, and that when that deadline from the ATF and Justice Department comes, people will either have to turn in or destroy their bump stocks. I guess it's interesting. I had talked to Adam Kraut earlier in the week, and he said they expected any day, and this actually came out the evening after. But he was actually very positive about their chances of getting this injunction on that rule. It turns out the judge didn't see it that way, and this is a tough time because this court case is going to be out there for a very long time. And even if it ends up being ruled in our favor and bump stocks are not banned, anyone who still has one will have been breaking the law for a couple of years. And I don't know where this is going to go. I'm really, really disappointed. Genevieve, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you on being disappointed about this one. I do legitimately can have an understanding on why uneducated people would be nervous about bump stocks. I do get it. But I also think that if you don't know anything, then educate yourself. Like banning bump stocks is not going to prevent mass shootings from happening. It's not gonna prevent killings from happening in general. I mean, you could take a car and murder a bunch of people if you really wanted to. Guns are not the problem. Bump stocks are not the problem. It's people. Yeah. And I think it's ridiculous, and it sucks that all of these people will have been officially breaking the law if this doesn't go through. You know, that's unfortunate and ridiculous.
And I'm just shocked. The original news story that's actually in the show notes is from NBC News, I'm sorry. And the headline is Federal Judge Upholds Trump Administration's Ban on Rapid Fire Bump Stocks. None of that is true. All they did is declined a temporary injunction against this unconstitutional regulation. Ed, what are your thoughts on the whole thing?
Well, I think the judge made an unreasonable decision knowing that this was going to go on. The injunction to prevent people from, being charged makes perfect sense. It's like, let's wait and see how these things work out in court. Instead, this judge is basically making policy before a judgment has been actually cast. Mm. So it doesn't seem to really make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it really doesn't. So the deadline is still active, and I think it's sometime in March, if I recall correctly. But yeah, this case is not going to be done by then. So this is a pretty big black eye for the side of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Indiana man shoots himself at the range while reholstering. I don't know if you saw this. It comes to us from Personal Defense World, and man, I don't want to laugh. Like it's bad. The whole situation is bad. So it's this guy, he's like shooting, he's drawn from his holster. He tries to it looks like it is a pancake holster, like a soft, Remora, I believe, holster that he's trying to put his gun back in while in the waistband, which is the exact opposite of what I teach people if they choose to use like a sticky holster or a Remora holster, and trying to put it in his waistband, finally lets go of the gun, and the gun like flops out of the pancake holster because it wasn't fully in his waistband. And then he's grabbing for it, and eventually has a negligent discharge, shooting himself in the leg. And wow, there's so much to unpack here. Ed, I'll start with you. Lay it on us.
Well, I saw this is a great video for what not to do. And, the guy made mistakes from day one. The burst that comes with a decocker, he could have made the gun safe before he did any of that, and he would have been okay. But he was doing a draw from an enclosed booth, which is just a bad practice. He wasn't looking what he was doing when he was reholstering, which is a bad practice. He had the wrong holster for the job. I see this all the time on the range where I'll stop people and tell them, what TV show did you get that from? Because there's a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it. And I tell everybody the most dangerous part is the holster work. That's where most accidents happen. But you get a lot of people that are self-taught or don't care or don't want to, seek a professional. And this is what you end up with.
Yeah. And he's just so cavalier about it. Genevieve, thoughts?
So I think that even if he went through doing all of these things wrong, if he had just done the one thing that I'll teach my students is that if you drop the gun, don't try to catch it. Mm-hmm. Like if he just didn't catch it, none of this would have happened. Like it's going to fall on the floor and it's not going to go off. Don't try to catch it. And I was reading the article and it says that this guy is pretty involved in the shooting sports. I think it mentions that he might even be an instructor. I could be wrong on that. but I know that he has had experience shooting. So we all get complacent sometimes, especially when we're around it every day, but we can't forget the basic rules of safe shooting.
I could not agree more. And if you have a sticky holster, remora, or some kind of soft holster that collapses on itself, when you reholster, take it out of your waistband, put the gun in it safely, then put the entire apparatus back in your waistband. Just don't try to put a gun in a flat holster.
The good news is he wasn't practicing doing it appendix carry.
That is true, actually. Yeah.
Well, there's that.
There is that. Didn't know the guy was a sharpshooter.
Let's see. I'm going to move up to Florida man kills neighbor that threatened him in potential stand your ground case. This comes to us from the Orlando Sentinel. Apparently, this guy sees a couple of his neighbors arguing. He goes out, tries to get involved, and to stop it, goes back in to call 911. One of the neighbors comes onto his property. He puts several bullets in him, and it looks like it's going to be a test of the stand your ground law in Florida. And I don't know. There's a lot here. I'll save my commentary. And Genevieve, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Clearly, a lot of things done wrong here that led to this. But what do you think?
Well, from reading the article, it seems like this man and his neighbor were having a loud argument, loud enough for other neighbors to come out and try to break up the argument. I think that before it escalated to the point that it did, the man could have done something like go into his house and lock the door and call the police or do something to mitigate the situation before it turned out to be what it is. And, you know, I like the stand your ground laws, but it just seems like something was done incorrectly here to me. It just seems like a loud argument turned into something that it really didn't need to turn into.
Yeah, that's the tough one for me. Ed, what do you think?
I'd have to mirror everything that Genevieve just said. This was completely preventable.
Yeah, and this is the tough one. This is Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman. You know, he inserted himself into a situation like he may have been justified in using lethal force against someone who was over him, laying on the ground and pounding his head into the sidewalk. The problem is that he put himself into that situation. It wasn't random chance. It wasn't anything else. He put himself into a situation that he had to use lethal force to get out of. And that's the part that really turns my stomach. Like, and Ed, you even mentioned it already. Like, we have to be polite and conflict avoidant and all those other things. I mean, sometimes being a good witness is the most that we can do without putting ourselves in harm of either, you know, taking injuries or death ourselves or having to employ that against someone else, right?
No, absolutely.
So yeah, this one, you know, I'm glad Florida has this law because if he felt his life was in danger, I'm glad he defended it. But again, it all comes back to don't put yourself in situations like this. It seemed completely avoidable, at least from this person who had to end another person's life.
Yeah. The best way to win a gunfight is to not get in a gunfight.
Amen.
100% agree. All right, let's move into the I'm Offended segment. Another city is letting children drive policy. On this show, we've seen something kind of sweeping the nation after Parkland in Florida, where we're letting kids really tell policymakers and politicians how to legislate and what's important to legislate. I think that kids being involved in government is extremely important. In Helena, Montana, there's a group of students that are basically helping to put together a bill this legislative session that they hope will help address gun safety in Montana. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that. I didn't realize there was a big problem with gun violence in Montana. I didn't realize that there was enough people to fill a high school in Montana, actually. But what do you think, Genevieve? Do you think kids should be guiding public policy?
I agree with you that children getting involved in government is very important because they need to be educated. The problem with educating these kids nowadays is that in public school, it's all to the left. I mean, I've heard crazy stories from, you know, children getting bad grades on tests because they didn't want to dislike the president that we have right now. I mean, it's just everybody who's in a public school right now has leftist views because that's what they're taught. So it's a little bit ridiculous to have them organizing all of these organizations to, you know, mitigate gun violence when they don't know really anything other than what they're taught in the school. It's an unfair opinion. It's biased. A
lot of it's very driven by emotion instead of facts. And that's the kind of thing that I find concerning. And I agree, include the kids in legislative process and political things. But when we start letting them guide policy, based on their emotions and what they need. I just think that's bad policy. Ed, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think, it's the sort of thing, depending on where you are, this sort of legislation could go either way. What I saw that was encouraging about this article is there's actually a move so that firearm safety will be taught in the schools. That's what the kids wanted. So, I could see where this story would go completely the other way, like what happened after Parkland and what all the non-experts were saying. But what the kids in Montana were saying is, no, let's get some firearms education courses in the school, which is much more proactive and a lot wiser. I was actually surprised by the outcome of the story.
Yeah, I think that one's good. The stuff that has me a little bit more concerned is fines for people that leave guns unsecured, what those mean, and things like that. So, I mean, again, like, kids can have opinions. Kids deserve to be able to voice those opinions. It's up to politicians, legislators, and other adults to actually guide things that should be in law. But yeah, that's definitely a good part of it. This one's interesting. Ohio school cancels shoot the president game amid severe backlash. Now, me personally, when Barack Obama was our president, I referred to him as President Obama. I respect the office of the president more than I respect the individual in it, which I respect the individual in it as well, but the office is much more important to me than who fills it at a time. So when we talk about things like this, it's just ridiculous. Let me read a little bit about what it was. Brief description, didn't include any specific reference to President Trump, but basically, where'd it go? There is one president with bodyguards. Everyone else basically gets Nerf guns and tries to eliminate or shoot the president. They called that something different than I was in school, which was also apparently inappropriate and we're not allowed to do anymore. But this just seems like a bad idea all around. Genevieve?
I read this article and I had to read it actually like 2 or 3 times because I couldn't believe that this was an actual thing that was occurring. I mean, I'm very conservative of a person, but even if it was when Barack Obama was in office, I would have never been okay with people playing a game like this. I mean, it goes against common human decency. And exactly like you said, Sean, respect the office, respect the president, no matter what their views are. You can't just go around shooting people you don't like.
So ridiculous. Ed?
Yeah. It's pretty obvious. I was a teacher. I can't imagine it. I think this was actually done at a community center rather than a school, but I think we're splitting hairs there. It's a bad idea regardless of the venue. Mm-hmm. It's completely disrespectful. I'm really surprised the Secret Service didn't show up.
Yeah, it's a good point. They still might. I don't even know. Well, I guess we'll continue in California just because we already talked about the conservative activists being beat up at UC Berkeley, but now UC Davis professors reprimanded for saying police need to be killed. And just to be clear, what he actually said on Twitter was, I mean, it's easier to shoot cops when their backs are turned, no? People think that cops need to be reformed. They need to be killed. I am thankful that every living cop will one day be dead, some by their own hand, some by others, too many of old age. Hashtag let's not make more. These are all tweets tweeted by this UC Davis professor who has now been reprimanded. This is ridiculous. Ed?
Well, UC Davis is known for being way out on the fringe to begin with. It all goes back to the educational system and where their loyalties and agenda lies. I mean, that speaks for itself. You got to consider the source. You got to consider the environment. Am I surprised? No, not really. Guy will probably get promoted next year.
Yeah, probably. Get tenure. Genevieve?
Well, I truly hope that this guy does not get tenure, honestly. It's a little bit ridiculous. I do agree on one hand that the reason that I carry a gun is because a lot of times the police won't be able to respond fast enough, but I also have a very high respect for them. And I'm going to quote myself here from 5 minutes ago. You cannot go around killing people that you don't like.
I agree.
It's frowned upon. Yeah.
That's an excellent quote. So silly. So anyway, he's been reprimanded, guys. Everything's going to be okay. He's had a stern talking to, and that's the.
And he'll go back to work on Monday. It's fine.
That's the extent of it. Thanks for this headline there, Kenny. Dick's Dysfunction now has a support group. So the CEOs of Dick's, Tom's, Levi's, and RXR Realty push gun control in an open letter. They sent an open letter to Congress saying gun violence in America is not inevitable. It's preventable. There are steps Congress can and must take to prevent and reduce gun violence. And all I see here is that apparently Dick's decline in business that they have even said comes to their stance on gun control wasn't enough for them, and they just want to get even less money. Genevieve, what do you think about this political activism on the part of corporations?
I think it's a little bit silly. I understand to a point wanting to advocate for something that you believe in. Like, I get it, but Dick's Sporting Goods they were making a huge amount of money off the hunter's market for a long time. And I haven't shopped there for a while since all of that stuff first surfaced. But, you have to imagine that they're losing a lot of money over stuff like this. So I think it's silly for those corporations that are big enough like that to get involved in politics. Like, if you want to make your voice heard, then go do it somewhere else outside of your company. Yeah,
I totally agree. And I hope that they suffer even more for this. I'm sorry to their employees, but this company is just making misstep after misstep, and they are paying the price. Like, we've had stories on this show about how much they're in the negative, or how much their business has been affected negatively because of their stance on gun control. And the CEO even said that he doesn't care. And I think that ridiculous. Ed, what do you think?
Well, I think the stockholders are only going to have so many limits before they get rid of this guy, because the CEO has to report to the stockholders. And if their profits are down to 75%, they're not going to keep him around. I'm a little tired of the corporate virtue signaling that we're better than everybody else, that they're going to tell us how we should live. Same with Levi's, it's like, guess what? I buy 511s now. People shop with their feet, same thing with Hollywood. Hollywood's down 23% because of the same thing. Americans are tired of the political agenda being pushed by an industry.
I think they are. I'm not a boycott kind of guy. Like, I had Starbucks this morning, but I'll tell you what, I haven't stepped foot in a Dick's Sporting Goods in quite a while. They've gone too far, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I agree with you. That's a good point too that you made, Ed. We don't want to be told what to believe in by a corporation. That's a little ridiculous.
Completely. Completely. All right, guys, let's move into our full auto news segment. This is just crazy stuff, interesting stuff, whatever it happens to be. Genevieve, I'll start with you. What story did you choose?
So I'm very excited about this one because I think it is ridiculous and infuriating at the same time. A woman was banned from using Tinder because she posted her profile picture with a deer that she had hunted. So now I don't know all that much about Tinder, fortunately, from what I've heard. But to be banned from anything because of your personal preference of whatever you like to spend your time doing is ridiculous. And she didn't break any of the community guidelines. She made sure that there were no firearms or weapons whatsoever in any of the pictures. It was simply just because she posted a picture hunting and they got angry about it. And what really amazed me is that some people who had been talking to her screenshotted the photos and apparently sent them to the company she works at to try to get her fired just because they were upset personally about her choice of how she was trying to spend her time. And it's just another example of those extremists who are just doing anything to give us a bad name,
Yeah, it's so crazy because apparently hunting, she's from New England. Yeah.
Vermont. That was what it said on.
Yeah, she's from Vermont. She was vacationing in San Francisco, San Francisco, open Tinder, posted the pictures, and apparently them San Francisco boys weren't into it. Ed, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a great hunting culture in New England, and all I can say is there's a lot of two-way guys that are bummed out now because they'll never be able to hook up with her. Having never been on Tinder, I can only tell you what I've heard, but it's the whole virtue signaling thing over and over and over again. And It's weird because I was talking to a buddy of mine last week who came up with a great phrase. It's a victim fetishization where people now get off on being victims, literally. So it's almost sexual to where, I'm more offended than you are. And somehow that's hot. And I can't get my head around that, why people would get off on being victims.
Swipe left, man. I'm out.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying,
Oh, so silly. But yeah, I don't get it. It was Bumble was the other dating app. Jackie Billings actually talked about this. She wrote a story about it for Guns.com where people are not even allowed to show firearms in their Bumble profiles, no matter
Wow.
what. Yeah. Ed, what was the story you chose?
Mine was about Charlie Daniels because, you got to like the guy. He doesn't pull any punches. His filter fell out a long time ago. And he was basically calling out all the actors at the Oscars regarding the fact that so many are out anti-guns, but there was a huge security presence at the Oscar. And, all these folks are, have got armed security while at the same time preaching that none of us should have the same. And I just found it ironic and just on point. Yeah,
I agree. Genevieve?
It's just the hypocrisy of all of it that is irritating me a lot. And I don't have to tell anybody listening to this podcast that, all of these people are advocating for no guns when they have 25 armed security guards around them. And it just drives me up a wall.
Disgusting hypocrites. I swear. Hollywood, give me a break.
Yeah.
I really think it would actually be if they would actually lead by example. So many of them make millions on movies that glorify violence. Why don't they get together and sign a pledge that they will no longer do movies that involve guns?
Because they wouldn't make any money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
You look at some of the industry leaders that are against this, like, Charlize Theron, and she came out with a movie last year, Atomic Blonde, that had a huge body count. And it's like, wait a minute, if you guys are really this serious about it, why don't you guys stop making money off of the issue and just sign a pledge that you're never going to do another movie with a gun and put your money where your mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
I could not agree more.
Yep.
Yeah. Hollywood drives me insane. We should never idolize the thought or the concept of celebrity. I find it vile, and I find Hollywood just a disgusting cesspool.
Well, they're down 23% from last year. They took a bigger hit this year than they did last.
Good.
And,
keep it going.
People are just turned off.
Yeah. Like, I do not care what a celebrity says. I'm like, we don't live in the same world there, fella. It's just, you worry about different things than the rest of us worry about.
Yep. I like characters. I don't care about actors.
Agreed. I like stories and tales. That's about it. I could care less about the people who play them.
And please, no more remakes.
Except Bill and Ted 3. I want to see that.
We don't need another Ghostbusters, though.
Good stuff. All right, that'll do for our stories tonight. But before we go, I want to hear kind of what you guys have been up to and where people can find you. Ed, I'll start with you.
Well, you can find us on YouTube at Shooter the Series. Shooter is spelled SH007ER. We're really stoked because we just passed our 1,000th subscriber. So we're getting ready to monetize if YouTube likes what we're doing and we meet community standards. We've got some big interviews. We've got a lot of things planned in the future. So we're pretty psyched about the stuff we've been doing on YouTube. I'm also staying pretty busy, training individuals, helping people get ready for CCW. You can find me on Thorell Firearms Education and Training on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find. So just staying busy, hustling every day. From the sound of the same thing that Genevieve does.
I love it. Very cool, man. Thank you again, Ed, for being here. We appreciate it.
I love it. Happy to come back anytime.
Genevieve, how about you? What you been up to? Where can people find everything that you're up to?
Well, right now I only have an Instagram account, BeyondTheUnknown. It Doesn't have all that many subscribers, but I'm very excited about it. I recently got over 5,500, so I'm just so stoked. Everybody has been so incredible. Seriously. Cool. The amount of support has been outstanding. At SHOT Show, I did it's sort of like a mini show, only a couple of minutes long with Guns.com actually, and I had heard from the guy who did the interview with me that it should be published by the end of this week. So at SHOT Show, it was with a mental health awareness group called Walk the Talk America. I don't know if anybody here has heard of them before, but they're doing really great stuff. So if anybody's interested in hearing that, it should be out by the end of this week, early next week. Not to throw Guns.com under the bus and push them forward to get it out or anything, but I'm excited about it. And if anybody wants to check that out, go over to their website or hit up my Instagram, BeyondTheUnknown. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Appreciate it. You did a great job. Thanks for being with us again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I don't know what I was nervous about. You host a great show.
Well, it's you guys did it all. I just stood here and read headlines. But I truly appreciate not just you guys for being here, but for everyone who listens. We really do appreciate it. Leave us a review in iTunes, or if you have problems, concerns about the show, definitely email me. I've been getting a lot of emails lately. I love it. People were upset about what Maj Touré said, and all I got to say to that is people are allowed to have their own opinions, whether you agree with them or not. If you don't like his opinion, I suggest you form your own and share that with people. I think that's great. I'm not going to tell him he's wrong because I don't, whether I agree with it or not, because he has the right to have it. He has the right to talk about it, and that's just the way it is. Sorry if you don't like it. But really do appreciate the listeners, really appreciate all the people out there. The stats on the show continue to go up and up, so I hope that we're doing something you guys like. Don't forget to check out the Second Call Defense, firearmsradio.tv/SCD. That's where you can find it. It's self-defense insurance. It's incredibly inexpensive every single month. I believe $10-12, something like that is their basic protection package. And if you have a gun in your house, if you carry a gun every day, definitely look into that. They pay everything day one, $1, so you're never out of pocket. And I think that's pretty important because who has $50,000 sitting around to fight a prolonged legal battle in either criminal or civil court, right?
Not me.
Not me either. Check out the Patriot Patch Company, patriotpatch.co. Join their Patch of the Month Club. And I just got to say, thanks as always to our super producer, Kenny Ortega. This Week in Guns is produced by Kenny Ortega and is a production of the Firearms Radio Network. I can't wait to talk to you all next week.